Hello, everybody. You're listening to Truth Talk. I'm Steve, and I'm here with my co-host Joe.
Hi, how you doing, everybody? Joe Green.
And this is our newest show. If you've ever watched Hero Talk, which is our main podcast, then you will know who we are.
Good.
Truth Talk is all about conspiracies and weird and strange phenomenon that happen in our society and in our world. Um, Ranging anywhere from aliens to assassinations to whatever. So, without further ado, we're going to get right into our first episode. Our first episode is going to be, well, you guessed it, Area 51 and aliens.
Aliens, all right.
The alien, they are the UFO phenomenon, right? So, um, Area 51. Have you ever heard of Area 51?
I have heard of Area 51 in real life, not movie references of like was it Independence Day or
Men in Black.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah. But I do. I like as we get through the podcast, I do have an experience of a guy who knew a guy that lived out there, and he believed that we were trading babies for alien technology, and I think this goes right into
That's
what you want to talk about.
We'll talk about that actually. All right, so yes, Area 51 for many, many years, the U.S. government, U.S. Air Force denied its existence. It's really just a small little speck on the map inside a much bigger military complex. It's really called Groom Lake. You may have also heard it called Dreamland, but it's really called Groom Lake, and so. It's been in operation for many, many years, decades, in fact. And the U.S. Air Force really didn't even acknowledge its existence until the late 80s, early 90s. And
that Clinton had to do that?
Yeah, kind of. So it was, it kind of came out because it gained notoriety. There were already people who knew it existed, but it gained notoriety thanks to a guy by the name of Bob Lazar, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But the Area 51, it literally is in the middle of the desert. It's not far from Las Vegas. And supposedly the United States government has, tests top secret aircraft there. And in fact, they have in the past. And whether or not they still do, who knows? But more than likely they do. The security there is extremely tight, although there is absolutely no fences. There are no gates. There are no gate guards. But they know when you're there, and as soon as you cross that, or even get close to that line, you're being watched by.
Of course, because it doesn't
military
exist.
Vehicles.
Yeah, finger quotes if you can. For podcasters.
A lot of people call that highway out there an extraterrestrial highway, which is kind of cool. But so anyway. We'll get into the military aspect of Area 51 for a second. Area 51 has been used to test many aircraft, primarily designed and built by a subsidiary of Lockheed, which is now Lockheed Martin, called the Lockheed Skunk Works. Lockheed Skunk Works was founded by founded by a guy by the name of, sorry, I can't talk. By the name of a guy, his name is Kelly Johnson. And Kelly Johnson, his mission in the early days of the Skunk Works was to develop spy planes for the U.S. government, specifically the CIA and the United States Air Force. The first of such aircraft we now today know as the U-2 spy plane. As you all know, the U-2 was shot down over the Soviet Union piloted by Francis Gary Powers. We tried to deny it, but they had to pilot. So the Air Force looked for, and the CIA looked for even better, faster, higher flying aircraft to spy on the Soviets. And the most famous aircraft probably to ever be developed and tested out in that facility would have been the A-12, designed for the Central Intelligence Agency. The A-12 is, we've come to know the A-12 today is by the Air Force variant, which is the SR-71 Blackbird, which to this day is still the fastest plane ever built by mankind. There are a lot of interesting things about the Blackbird, but that's for another show, another day. But so Kelly Johnson, he was the CEO of the Skunk Works up until 1975, and he turned the Skunk Works over to a guy by the name of Ben Rich. Ben Rich, a lot of people consider Ben Rich to be the father of stealth technology.
Okay. Stealth bomber, stuff like that.
Yeah, he's been doing stealth stuff forever. He's an aeronautical engineer, um, and he was personally involved with projects such as Have Blue, which became the F-117A Nighthawk.
Okay.
He was personally involved with the development of the F-22 Raptor.
Okay. Well.
And the early stages of the F-35 Lightning too. Ben Rich, he died of cancer in 1995. But from 75 up until about 94, not long before his death, he was the CEO of Lockheed Stone.
Okay.
Have Blue was interesting. Have Blue was created as a prototype in the mid 70s, and from Have Blue actually became the concept of Have Blue actually became the F-117A Nighthawk, and this is a good comparison now to gauge whether or not we really think the government is capable of keeping secrets. A lot of people think, well, nobody can keep secrets that big, or nobody can, hide things like that forever. Well, I will tell you, the the F-117A Nighthawk entered operational status, i.e., full squadron strength, in 1979. It flew out of a little known Air Force base in the middle of the Nellis Test Range, which is a much bigger Air Force base, which coincidentally Groom Lake is also part of the Nellis Test Range, out in Nevada. And nobody knew it existed until 1989 when the Air Force officially announced it existed.
Wow.
So for a decade, the United States Air Force kept that secret. The United States government kept that secret. So to think that they can't keep secrets, we would be quite mistaken.
Yeah.
They are quite good when keeping secrets when they need to be. And sometimes, as we've learned in the past, if you've ever read anything or things like Roswell, some of those instances, which we'll get to a little bit later in this show, some of those secrets are kept through intimidation and fear.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, that's just a little bit of background on that. Now, Ben Rich, like I said, he passed away from cancer in 1995. A lot of people call it his deathbed interview, but it was actually a combination of about 3 different things that happened towards the end of his lifespan, right? One was a friend of his by the name of John Andrews had written him a letter asking him certain questions. John Andrews was another aerospace engineer who worked for Lockheed, and so he asked it. He asked that letter to Ben Rich. He asked him to share his opinion on certain things, phenomena, right?
Say this is John Andrews?
Yes.
Okay.
And so Ben Rich's answer to that was that there are 2 types of UFOs. There's the ones that we build and the ones they build. He goes on to say that he was a believer in both categories, and he feels everything is possible. Many of our man-made UFOs are unfunded opportunities. Rich underlined the term UFOs, unfunded opportunity. But he didn't really give any explanation of that. But he went on to state that the most biomorphic aerospace designs were inspired by Roswell spacecraft. Rich wrote he believed the American public could not handle the truth about UFOs and ETs. However, he changed his mind toward the end of his life and felt that keeping the secret could be more of a danger to citizens and personal freedoms under the United States Constitution than the presence of off-world visitors themselves. Also, in 1993, he gave a speech at UCLA, and during the speech, he made a comment. So he says, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black budget projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." At the end of the speech, Rich said, we now have the technology to take ET home. So, at the end of that after he gave that speech, he was approached by a couple other gentlemen. One named Jan Harzen, and the other was Tom Keller. They're both engineering alumni from UCLA, and they're both UFO enthusiasts. And they asked him about what did he mean by taking ET home. And there have been a lot of interpretations of what Rich says here, but I'll let you decide for yourselves. So Harzen reported that Rich said, "We know how to travel to the stars. We found an error in the equations, and it won't take a lifetime to do it." And Harzen goes on to say that Rich said he didn't say what the equations were, so Harzen pursued questioning and the workings of interstellar propulsion systems. So Rich turned to Harzen and then asked him, "How does ESP work?" And Harzen replied back to Ben Rich, saying, "I don't know. All points in space and time are connected." And Ben Rich says, "Well, that's how it works." So he's talking about the folding of space and time. And
creating wormholes.
Correct.
Sorry.
So, that's interesting, and it can be interpreted in many ways. So, you just have to take that with a grain of salt. Then 10 days before his death, another aerospace journalist by the name of James Goodall, who had been friends with Ben Rich for quite some time, called him on the phone at the medical center in Los Angeles where Rich was basically dying. And he says, and Ben Rich says, "Jim, we have things out in the desert that are 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. If you have seen it on Star Wars or Star Trek, we've been there, we've done that. Or we've decided that it wasn't worth the effort." They have about 4,500 people at Lockheed Skunk Works, and what they've been doing for the last 18, 20 years, they're building something. And so there's a lot of speculation as to what he meant. And so, but it gives you an idea that there are other possibilities other than just spy planes.
Okay. That they've taken to the next level, which would be space exploration,
right, which is awfully funny because just recently, the current administration
talk about the Space Force
created. We've always had United States Naval Space Command, and we had United States Space Command, which is the Air Force variant of Space Command, and but now it's been deemed as important enough that we're going to give it its own branch of the military. United States Space Force.
I don't want to jump to the conspiracy theories, but I've already believed that we already have a Space Force. I don't want to jump your train of thought.
That's a good possibility. And in fact, in a later episode, we're not going to talk about it today, but in a later episode, we are going to address something that's called solar warden. So if you want to prep for that episode, you can look that up, and we'll talk about that at a later time. That goes right along with the Space Force already.
Yeah.
So anyways, let's go back to Area 51 for a minute. Area 51. It's like I say, it's in the middle of nowhere. There are roads out there, contrary to a lot of people's misbelief. A lot of people think you can only get there by aircraft, but there are roads. They're just not well-traveled roads. It is inhospitable terrain. And in recent years, the U.S. Air Force has actually extended the perimeter of what we know as Area 51, or Groom Lake. It used to be you could actually get close enough that you can get up on some cliffs. You could actually see aircraft, flying in and out of from the runways at Area 51. And now you can't get close enough to see that. So obviously they don't want you to see something.
Yeah.
But we know it's still very much in use, and comparison photos from the past and more modern overhead photos taken from satellites have shown they've actually expanded runways. They're much bigger. There are more runways than there used to be. So there's still quite a bit of activity at the site. What they do, who knows? For all we know, it could just be a cover for their real site.
Presidential bunker.
Right. But let's talk about some of the things that came out. Why did Area 51 really come into the limelight? Well, in 1989, George Knapp, who was an investigative journalist at the time for KLAS in Las Vegas, interviewed a man who, in the initial interview, just went by the name of Dennis, and his face and voice was obscured to protect his real identity. That man, we later learned, was a guy by the name of Bob Lazar, or Robert Lazar. Bob Lazar, in that initial interview, talked about quite a few things that were interesting. Now, there's a lot of speculation in Bob Lazar, so you have to take what he says and what I'm about to tell you with a grain of salt. Not everyone believes Bob Lazar.
Mm-hmm.
Many people think he's just a hoaxer, and he is basically just full of crap. And that may be very well possible, but there are some things in what he talked to George Knapp about that later on will become very important. And George Knapp did a little bit of investigating on his own and found multiple things within his story that were credible and had backup evidence to show that they were credible. In fact, George Knapp actually won. He's a credible investigative journalist. He's won multiple awards. So it's not like he's a fly-by-night guy. It's not Geraldo opening Al Capone's vault, right? So, not that Geraldo's not credible, but he did have a bad experience with Al Capone's vault. If you're older like we are, you remember watching that. It was like on TV and it was like live. Never open stuff live. So, but anyhow. George Knapp also does sometimes hosts on Coast to Coast AM, which is a talk radio. Okay, so Bob Lazar claimed to work in an area of Area 51 called Sector 4 or S4. He claimed to be underground, and it's kind of funny because they deny that S4 even exists. The Air Force denies S4 exists, Sector 4. However, the area where Bob Lazar said it was at, from aerial photographs, actually show a road going from the main base at Groom Lake, around the lake, to where S4 is supposed to be. I don't know why you'd have a road going to nowhere. But anyway, so that's just one of the little things. But the biggest thing is what Bob Lazar claimed to do at S4. He claimed his job was to reverse engineer alien propulsion technology. All right, something to do with gravity waves or whatever. And what produced or what powered these engines is actually an atomic element that in 1989 was not even on the periodic table of elements. Okay, it was element 115. We now know it today as muscovium. We on Earth have not been able to create muscovium in a stable environment for more than a few seconds. But in 2003, element 115 became a reality in a super collider in Russia. When we collided two atoms together, a team of American and Russian scientists. So it does exist, and it didn't exist when Bob Lazar first talked about it, which is kind of strange. Could it be he predicted it? Could it be he just guessed it? Could it be, the whole reason they actually did it in the super collider was, to say, he's just full of crap, so you can't even make this thing stable. Who knows? But that's for you to decide.
But he actually mentioned a chemical, an element that didn't exist.
Didn't exist
to 2003
for another 15,
in
16
1989.
Years.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's just one of the things that kind of corroborates the story. Now, some of the things that are kind of hokey about his story is his education background. He claims to have worked at Los Alamos National Laboratories as well as Area 51. Now, there is record of him working in Los Alamos. His title was some kind of technician. He claims to hold master's degrees from both MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and CIT, which is California Institute of Technology. Neither school has record of him ever attending. So but according to Bob Lazar, even in his initial interview, the government has taken extraordinary steps uh, to
silence him.
to hide the fact that what his educational background.
Okay.
Now, there is rumor that his photograph does show up in an MIT yearbook, but I can't corroborate that. So, and a lot of people don't think that the yearbook even exists. So, that may or may not be true. But could the government make him disappear? Absolutely. They can make anybody disappear if they want to.
If this podcast blows up, we might disappear.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the black helicopter to come after that. But now, but anyway, so that's just one of the hokey things about Bob Lazar is, is his education even really? Was he lying about his education? He's gone on, in subsequent, he's been arrested for multiple things over the years. One of them was a raid on his personal business by the U.S. government, and they actually, tried him and fined him like $7,500 because his side business is I can't remember what it's called, but he basically sells like chemicals and elements and rocks and minerals and things. And certain minerals you can't mail through the mail. Supposedly he mailed something to the mail. And anyway, they were looking for excuses to raid him. Every time he comes forward, he gets
raided.
Yeah, the government just puts pressure on him, which is kind of strange for somebody who sells rocks on the side of the road, really. And so kind of like the guy in Smallville.
Yeah.
But so it's a little bit difficult to take it all in and imagine, whether is he telling the truth, is he not? But even under oath, he has said, talked about his education and what his degrees are. So believe him, don't believe him. Do your own research on it. It's interesting stuff. But I will tell you this: something that one thing that is really corroborating for Bob Lazar, it's really in Bob Lazar's favor, is Bob Lazar is friends with a guy by the name of John Lear. And John Lear was considered by most at the time to be one of the foremost civilian authorities on aviation in the world. You ever heard of Learjet? John Lear owned Learjet. Okay, so this guy is not shady in any way. He's very corroborable and very intelligent human being, and he will tell you, and he's not afraid to tell you, that he was friends with Bob Lazar. And Bob Lazar actually used to take, remember those cliffs I said you used to get to be able to watch Area 51 before they widened their perimeter? Bob Lazar used to take John Lear out there and let him see some of the things that he was working on as they tested. And John Lear will tell you that that's absolutely true. So whether or not they were alien spacecraft they were testing or what, who knows? But whatever he was working on, John Lear saw. So take that as you will also. So, but that's neither here nor there. That's just one example of some of the crazy things that go on out of Area 51. To be honest with you, I personally believe probably 75% or better of all UFO sightings in the southwestern United States are top secret military projects.
That they're testing from Area 51.
All right, so keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit about the actual UFO phenomenon. Right, we're gonna wait Area 51 for a little bit, and let's talk about certain things. Let's talk about Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
Roswell happened in 1947. Roswell, New Mexico. Supposedly something crashed. The official story was it was a weather balloon. If you believe that, okay. If you don't, okay. But many people from Roswell will tell you, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that we sometimes keep secrets through fear and intimidation.
Mm-hmm.
They had people come out and tell them, you saw nothing here. If you ever speak of it, you'll end up, very deep in that desert. And people took it seriously. They believed it, and so they never come forward until late in life about what really happened at Roswell. There have been many movies and shows and stuff about Roswell over the years, and so you could do your own research on Roswell and see how what really happened. Um, Personally, I think an aircraft or spacecraft actually probably crashed there. Um, whether they found bodies or not, who knows? I don't know. But 6 years prior to Roswell, there, everybody likes to talk about Roswell. It's the first big one. But 6 years prior to Roswell, in a place called, I think it's Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I think that's how you say it. 1941, there was a crash. And it's long since been considered a urban legend, but there are some corroborating stories and some evidence. Um, in particular, there was a gentleman by the name of William Huffman, and William Huffman was a reverend, and he received a call that evening, and was asked to come out. There had been a crash. He was asked to deliver the last rites to people who were dying or
at the crash site.
At the crash site. He went on to say later on in his life, before he passed away, that what he delivered last rites to wasn't human, basically. So, and there was also speculation because the wreckage from that crash site, and this is just conjecture and rumor. There's no evidence. There's no records of anything. But the wreckage was all picked up by the Army, and it would have been the Army Air Corps, and was taken off to a laboratory. Eventually made its way to a laboratory called Bell Labs in New Jersey. Bell Labs, one of the lead scientists there was a guy named Shockley. 6 years later, in 1947, Bell Labs released the world's first transistor. Yeah. So, coincidence, maybe not. Maybe some reverse engineering going on.
I don't know. It's like I said, when I went to school in Boston, the guy I worked with, a new guy in Roswell, and the whole thing with the reverse engineering technology, because he said he lived out in Nevada, and he said Area 51 is where we would trade human babies for alien technology. So he said, look, after like 1950, look at how our technology has skyrocketed since then.
Right.
100 years prior to that, like 500 years prior to that, we thought the world was flat. And after 1950, we went from like the transistor radio to, the iPod. Just think about just think about 50 years from 1950 to the year 2000.
Well, Roswell happened in 48,
right,
or 47, excuse me. But in 1959, the first integrated circuit was released. That's like 12 years. But
the men in black are here. We're about to get neuralized.
The dog's going nuts.
You see that or Skynet. That's why you have a dog.
But so that's very possible. But there was some reverse engineering going on there. That's what led to the first integrated circuit. The person credited with the first integrated circuit, I think his name's Noel, but he worked at Fairchild. Actually, it became Fairchild Republic, and they later got absorbed into a bigger company. But which he only got credit because he was the first person to patent the IC. The IC had actually been invented several months earlier by another scientist at Texas Instruments, but he didn't patent it in time when the other guy patented it. They completely separate research or whatever, but they didn't. They didn't know each other had developed the same thing, and one person beat the other, even though he didn't really make it first. But in between that time frame, from 47, we had Roswell. You have literally like a dozen other confirmed UFO cases. Not necessarily crashes, but
Hmm.
cases. Uh, some of them quite strange and exciting. There was one in Kentucky in 1948, Maysville, Kentucky. That actually it was a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, and that actually involved supposedly a dogfight between the Air National Guard pilot and
Okay.
the
Yeah.
spacecraft, which resulted in the Air National Guard pilot crashing to his death.
Huh.
And that was just one incident.
But I'll tell you this: I've had a UFO experience, and like you can
Yeah.
talk to my mother and my aunt. We were in Bermuda. It's probably mid '80s, the early '80s, because I have family in Bermuda. We went out to eat, and we're outside the restaurants. It's in Hamilton, Bermuda, and they were like weird flashing lights above our head, and everybody outside could see these lights. We're looking up, no fireworks show. We're like, wow, that's pretty. Wow, that's funny. It looks like a UFO type thing, and I mean, a lot of witnesses. And like the next day, like my aunt like looked it up, and like it was unexplained phenomena that could be seen off the coast of North Carolina.
Interesting.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, I definitely believe that UFO encounters happen. Whether or not they're extraterrestrial in origin or not, nobody really knows. But I mean, throughout history, we go back throughout history, and you will find tons of references to UFOs. There are paintings from antiquity that show what appear to be UFOs.
Right.
There are sculptures and things that show what appear to be either beings or whatever in spacesuits, which is totally crazy.
Always like the similarities of you see like hieroglyphics when we say Egyptian pyramids, and Aztec, stuff like that. Similar
Oh yeah, they
features,
all
but
have.
when we didn't have that type of communication, it's two
Yeah,
different sides of the world, and in
they're
the primitive age
and
of the
yet they're the
human.
same. It's funny because what's considered to be the world's first true civilization is
Mm-hmm.
the ancient Sumerians,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very strange, but because they're ocean apart, sea navigation was not great at the time. The only real sea power at the time would have been the ancient Phoenicians, and there is some evidence that supports that the Phoenicians may have known of the existence of territory or lands outside of the Mediterranean.
Okay.
But the paradigm is the historical fact is we think of them just being Mediterranean bound.
Right.
But you mentioned the Sumerians, and that's interesting because they've actually found in ancient Mayan temples and things Sumerian artifacts.
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah,
which are like from halfway around
the world. Yeah, 500, it's like 5,000 years ago, where there was no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
So that's true, and many ancient cultures, whether you're talking about any one of dozens of tribes in Africa, in Asia, right here in North and South America, like the Hopi Indians, right here in North America. They all have rituals or verbal histories that have been passed down where they refer to sky people or star people. There are several African tribes that still to this day, they don the masks that they made centuries ago and hold these rituals, and that's what they're imitating as these sky people, people coming down from the stars. Hopi Indians used to talk about star children, where they would actually come and impregnate the women, and then they would take the babies.
Okay.
And
it goes to my guys talk about using human babies for
there's
technology.
There's even evidence of this today. In fact, I just recently watched a show. I think I was watching Ancient Aliens or something like that. But anyway, they were talking about this case where this woman, she was 4 months pregnant, and it had been documented. She'd been to all her doctor's visits. That she had a fetus, a whole 9 yards, and her and her husband had an experience, and they didn't really even put it together until later because they both had the same experience. They had the same dream, right? And in the dream, it was a nightmare because she was abducted and they literally took her baby out, right?
Mm.
And she woke up the next morning after this dream, this nightmare, and she noticed there was some blood splotching on her sheets. So she went to the doctor. They thought maybe she had a miscarriage, except for there was one problem.
So baby.
There was no fetus.
Ugh.
No, not only no fetus, but the womb was completely
Complete.
cleaned. I mean, there was nothing left in the womb.
Oh wow.
It's completely cleaned out.
Right.
And they had no explanation. Even the doctor said, normally we would call this a miscarriage, but there was nothing to miscarriage. It was gone. And so, what happened to this child? So what you were saying, we're trading babies for technology. That may very well be true. Or maybe we're trading babies for our survival.
Oh.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, I mean, if these beings can come here, they have the technology to come here from another world.
Yeah, we're the ants that.
Yeah, we're in a petri dish here.
Yeah.
We're not. We don't stand a chance, right? So, that's one of the many things there are many phenomena. You can get into philosophical and religious debates in ancient times too. From a religious standpoint, we think of Christ as being the Immaculate Conception, right? You know, basically, God said, Mary, you're going to have my child.
Mm-hmm.
And she carried his child to term, right? There was no other guy, or whatever. So, but what's to say that angel wasn't an alien?
Impregnated her artificially.
So
that's pretty interesting. I like this.
And it goes right along with the stories that the Hopi Indians have told and many other ancient peoples have told for centuries about star children and the star people. So it's just one of those things that is kind of
out there.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. So it's kind of some X-Files stuff. Right? But there are many people across the world, not just in like localized areas, but across the world have claimed to be abducted. What do you think about abduction?
I believe it. I know. I think you're going to tell me a good story about a president.
Yes,
a presidential candidate. Back in when he was running, and it wouldn't admit it, but he was very high in his beliefs. Very respectable president.
He was. Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. He was still governor of California at the time, and he was on his way to a fundraiser at Elizabeth Taylor's house. And when he finally arrived, he was late. Him and Nancy, they were like never late, but they were late. They finally showed up, and they were all disheveled, and they really were out of it. They just didn't know what had happened, and they lost time. And Reagan recounted how, he was driving on the road, and there was a bright light, and they pulled over, and when he realized a massive amount of time had passed, and they lost that time. He never got that back. He never figured that out. And as a politician,
you can't come out like that.
You don't really talk about stuff like that in an open forum. But there are multiple cases throughout his presidency where he discusses the UFO threat. Even the United Nations, he gave a speech to the United Nations and discussed the UFO threat. And he was definitely afraid of two things on this, in this universe: nuclear war and aliens. And and he took that to the end. When he finally left office, and his memoirs were finally published, a lot of that came to light because they just, during his tenure as a politician, that wasn't going to be, in the forefront.
This is something that Star Wars is also a defense against.
Yes,
exterior defense too.
There is some speculation that the reason he wanted to do the Strategic Defense Initiative was not just to put a missile shield above the United States, but to protect the United States from a perceived alien threat. And there is some evidence to that, whether or not you believe it or not. NASA has their own explanation, but there was a shuttle mission in the 80s. I think it was STS-41 or STS-48, one of the two. I don't remember. But there was film footage taken from the shuttle that showed an object, what looked like maybe maybe a rock, a meteor, whatever, heading towards the Earth's atmosphere. And that's not so unusual actually to see. But what made it unusual was what it did, as it literally stops in reverse course as you see some kind of light or beam fly outwards from the Earth towards it, and it's really unique footage. You can YouTube it. It's interesting. NASA's official explanation was it was ice particles that had broken off of the shuttle, and that's what they filmed.
Even though space, there's no gravity, there's no
it's
force, so
kind
things
of,
don't move without some type of force to
that is
reflected.
right, and that I mean, take that with a grain of salt. Take that as you will. I have seen some things where they showed that footage to a physicist from the University of Kansas, and I don't, his name escapes me now, and I probably should have done the research to find his name, but he was also one of the lead physicists on Reagan's SDI project, okay, Strategic Defense Initiative. We commonly called that Star Wars at the time, because we were talking about putting lasers and stuff in space. So, and you know, as crazy as that may have sounded back in the '80s, it did wonders for American prestige and power because it bankrupted the Soviet Union. Yeah. So they just couldn't compete with that. But anyway, he when asked what it was, he immediately said it was some kind of a particle projection weapon. And what? We don't even have particle projection weapons. We have like lasers, maybe masers, but we don't even have phasers yet. Right? what are you talking about? Some kind of, and other physicists, they like you might think it's crazy, but behind closed doors at places like DARPA and things like that, for some projects, we're as much as 400 years beyond anything you've ever seen, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah. So, do you think that Area 51 was used by NASA to film the lunar landing?
That's another good conspiracy for another show. But to be honest with you, I'm going to say right now, I truly believe that the United States put men on the moon in 1969. People can argue that all they want, but one thing that we as Americans are good at is when given a challenge, we'll rise to that challenge. And we were challenged. President Kennedy, said by the end of the decade we'll go to the moon. And although he didn't live to see it,
had to beat the Russians.
Had to beat the Russians. There's just maybe we will do an episode on that in the future, because, or maybe combine it with a few others. But that is a good conspiracy. And there is a lot of really good evidence. You really have to look hard at the evidence to believe or not believe that conspiracy. So, but my personal thought on that is we did land on the moon. Oh, okay. And I think we will go back again soon. If we're probably already there.
I think we're if we're different. I think we're still going. Yeah. I think Area 51 is that base, that space base that we use.
People miss a lot of things, like back in the '80s, the shuttle was at its height, and there was talk of building a aerospace plane, a plane that could actually take off like a plane, not like a rocket, like a space shuttle, but take off like a plane, go into orbit, and then come back in, and the ramifications of that were extraordinary. I mean, you're literally taking, hours and hours off flights. You can fly halfway around the world in minutes instead of hours. And, and it's funny, and a lot of people don't even realize it, but the Air Force actually has a space plane. It looks like a small space shuttle, really. And I think it was just last year, it came back down from an extended mission, and it stays in orbit. It goes up there and stays in orbit for like 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's crazy. And that's absolutely true. You can look that up, and it's amazing, actually. And what it does, nobody knows. Is it reconnaissance? Is it whatever? Nobody knows. So
I'm sticking to my trading babies.
Yeah, Maybe we're making deliveries.
Yeah.
Literally making deliveries. But so we're talking about baby snatches. We're talking about abductions. Hybrids. Hybrids are another thing that has been.
This is crazy, but it's like Bigfoot was an alien hybrid, something like that. That they aliens left behind.
Very well could. I've heard that theory too. Yeah, and that's another show, by the way. Sasquatch. So, but so they supposedly make hybrids between humans and their species. It's kind of weird, but it seems that they are awfully interested in the human reproductive system. Maybe it's because they don't reproduce the same way, or they don't have the ability to reproduce. Maybe that's why they need the babies. It's kind of like the White Walkers.
Yeah. They take our babies. See, yeah,
exactly.
I think it's like with DNA splicing, because humans do have that technology to clone and splice DNA.
I do. That's true, and we've come a long way in genetic technology. So, but as far back as the Egyptians, they talked about hybrids.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at these hieroglyphs, and you see the Egyptians with the animal heads and things like that. And same with the Sumerians. The Sumerians, you see a lot of them depicted with wings.
Yeah.
And what if those just aren't decorative?
Well, that's exactly a jackal hybrid to a human man.
What if they were really hybrids? And of course there's no evidence of that, but there's no evidence against it either. So
well, usually a myth is something we can't explain.
That's exactly what it is, and throughout history, that's exactly what we have. All myths are somewhat based in fact.
Something that happened.
And the reason they become myths is because they're fantastical. They're usually fantastical because the people can't explain it.
Right.
There are hieroglyphs in Egypt that one looks an awful lot like a light bulb. They got hieroglyphs of helicopters, ships. Things that they should not have seen or known even existed, but yet they're drawing them. The ancient Aztecs, had a lot of little glyphs and little pendants of, things that look like airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Flying machines.
Yeah, even in ancient Japanese lore, they talk about how the gods descended down, and that's how they get a lot of their actual belief system came from what they call the gods.
Yeah.
And they've actually got carvings and rocks that they carved. They're massive. They're massive. They were carved to emulate what they saw back in the in the ancient times, and they look like ships. They look like they. There's this one temple. They got this big rock, and the rock is said to weigh like 500 tons. And it looks like it floats. You get down and look, and there's space between the rock, and supposedly, I can't remember what they call it, but I got a name for it. But the essence of these gods, or these stars, inhabit the rock. So it's
interesting. It's very interesting.
Crazy. But as far as so many UFO sightings, back in 1997, you had what was called the Phoenix Lights. And, they tried to pawn that off as flares being launched from an A-10 on maneuvers. And it just doesn't add up. One, the flares don't look like these lights did. Too many people seen these lights, including the governor of Arizona. And it was funny because he tried to play it off while he was governor. He even had give a press conference and had somebody come out in an alien suit. And he got kind of mocked for that. But after he left politics, once he was no longer governor, he came forward and has expressed what he saw, what he believes he saw. And he truly believes that he saw a UFO that day. There have been other sightings most recently, and you can actually read about it. It's been on Fox News. It's been on other things. There's a couple new shows about some of the phenomena going on right now too. One is called, I think, it's Unidentified or something like that on History Channel. But um, the Navy pilots have had many run-ins and encounters with UFOs recently,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a big thing, and believe it or not, they actually recently this Navy pilot actually went and talked to this congressional committee
Mm-hmm.
about what he saw, and some of the people don't want to come forward because they're afraid it's going to affect their military
Right.
career or whatever, and there's a guy who used to work for military intelligence. His name is Luis Elizondo. Um, he actually left government service because he felt he wasn't getting his point across. That 'cause part of his job was to let the higher ups know
Mm-hmm.
that what threats were out there to the U.S. military, and these things are threats. These UFOs are threats, and nobody would take him seriously. So he actually left the government service because he believed in it so much.
Huh.
And he actually has a show on the History Channel now. But it's not just him. The former Assistant Secretary of Defense, um, his name is, I've got it written here. I'll tell you in a second. Chris Mellon, former
Okay.
Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. And everybody knows John Podesta, right? He was one of Hillary's campaign people.
Okay.
He was also, I think he was chief of staff for Bill Clinton,
Mm.
and he also worked in the Obama administration. He also has come forward, along with Luis Elizondo, to talk about this UFO phenomenon and the threat it represents. And I mean, these are high level people
Yeah.
who have reputations to uphold, and they're still willing to come forward and put their reputation on the line
Yeah.
to discuss this phenomenon. Now, whether or not they're alien, it's not the point. It's a UFO phenomenon,
Right.
and they could be some high tech Russian
Yeah.
that we don't know about. But yeah, the odds are I doubt that. But it's crazy what's out there. So all that being said, and we could go on for hours and hours and hours, and we just don't really have hours for the show. But the whole point of this episode is just let people know of that this phenomenon is out there.
Let's give them some information that they probably would not know.
Yeah, and that it is real. Whether or not it's alien in origin or not is total speculation. Um, and there's tons of evidence. The evidence just mounts and mounts. There's an actual organization called MUFON out there that that's all they do is gather information on UFO sightings from around the world and abductions and everything else. They have warehouses full of cases. It's crazy. There are so many cases from around the globe. In Britain, here in the United States, Russia. It's everywhere. Yeah. So it's not like it's just isolated to any one place. It's not just isolated to Area 51.
No, it's worldwide. It's a worldwide
phenomenon. Yeah. And the unique thing is, almost every time you have people from all the four corners of the earth that experience almost the same exact things. Their stories are almost the same things. Those that claim to have actually seen their abductors always paint them the same way. They're always like these little gray, we call them grays because of the way they look, but they almost always look alike, even though these people have never spoken to each other. Right. And it's just kind of, it's just one of those things. Do we believe it? Do we not believe it? There's just too much evidence to say it's not. And, to be honest with you, Story Musgrave said it best, when he was asked if he believed in UFOs. And he actually does, by the way. But, if you look up at the stars, there are trillions of stars up there. To think that we are the only intelligent life in the universe would be just pure human arrogance.
Totally agree.
For many years there was the philosophy, especially in the Christian religion, Catholicism to be exact, that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around us. We now know that's not true, and even the Catholic Church has acknowledged that there's probably extraterrestrial life. and it's funny because even all the years the church denied that there was anything but humans, uh, they.
They own the most with
The
telescopes.
Vatican owns more observatories
Stories,
in the world than any other entity, which is kind of funny. So, but yeah, so it's crazy, and it's a real phenomenon. I encourage everyone to do their own research and check it out. Um, I think it's become more mainstream. I think you've had things like the Vatican come out and let you know that they believe that there may be extraterrestrial life, because I think they're prepping us to tell us there actually is extraterrestrial life.
Well, yeah, like you said, you listen to Hero Talk, we're big movie buffs and we love our comic movies. And then Tommy Lee Jones said it best in Men in Black. Like, humans are scared, panicky creatures. And to give them that type of information would cause chaos.
Would.
So
that's why we hide that shit.
Yes, totally believe it. Yeah, it's like I totally believe this phenomenon. I totally believe that Area 51 is. I think it's like a transfer station, if you want to call that, between us and them. If you air quotes.
Very possible.
Yeah.
Possible. So, since this is our first episode, we're starting this kind of a tradition thing. At the end of each episode, we're going to do a Siskel and Ebert thing, and we're either going to give thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever, whether or not we believe in these conspiracies and whether or not we think they're true, or whether or not there's a good possibility they're true. And in this case, I got to give a thumbs up.
I totally give this a thumbs up. Totally.
Because I do believe that there are other beings out there.
Yeah.
And
I think, like, to go to your initial point, I believe Area 51 is the base where we.
I think so too.
Where all this stuff happens.
There is a lot more we can talk about. So many more cases. So many more things. Especially if you delve into ancient aliens and things like that. I highly encourage you to watch Ancient Aliens if you're interested. There's a lot of good information.
Yeah, I've watched it. Yeah, good episodes.
And even if you're a non-believer, there's a lot of good stuff to just make you think about the possibilities of what could be and how things, got to where they were. How centuries ago did they move, stones like at
to the top of the pyramids and stuff like that.
Right. Or so place in South America, Machu Picchu. The stones are huge, and but anyhow, that's for another show, and hopefully you'll like our show and you'll tune in to some future episodes. Just give you an idea of some of the things we got coming up, and we're going to have an episode on presidential assassination. Of course, you can all guess what the topic is on that. And we're going to talk about, I already mentioned, Solar Warden is coming up. And we're going to talk about all kinds of good stuff. Everything from the Illuminati, the New World Order. There's so many conspiracies. We're going to talk about them all. And stick around. We'll have a bonus episode at the end of the season.
I can't wait for that one.
Really love it. Really.
Can't wait for that.
So check us out and give us a listen. And thanks for tuning in. You listen to Truth Talk with Steve and Joe.